Greetings, explorers. Today, we look into the fog, and we find a lake. Lake Crescent. Something lives in this lake. Something hidden. Something horrible. It is a creature that lives not only in the lake, but in the anxieties of anyone who ventures out onto open water. I present to you Northern Waters. I spent a decade of my life as a local police officer in Washington State, and I'm lucky to say that the vast majority of my career was a peaceful experience. From 1973 to 83, I worked with a small police team nearby Lake Crescent. Thankfully, or not thankfully, depending on your perspective, the most terrifying experience of my career was not the kind of event that normally happens to police anywhere in America, or really any other location that I can think of. This was during the summer of 1981. A chopper had gone down in the lake, and I was dispatched, along with my fellow officers, Cooper and Richard, to recover the pilot's body and tow in the chopper. I'll spare you all the mundane details of filling out police paperwork and the general preparation that went into the mission, if you could even call it that. Once all of us were ready, Cooper, Richard, and I went out onto the water in an effort to recover the downed aircraft, as well as its unfortunate pilot. Richard opted to stay topside, to basically oversee everything, as Cooper and I went down below to first obtain the deceased and then attach cables to the aircraft itself so we could take it back to shore. We were being watched. Immediately this was apparent. I mean, obviously Richard was up on the boat, but it just felt thoroughly creepy by that point. The water in Lake Crescent was actually pretty clear. If I recall, Cooper and I shared worried expressions in our eyes as we approached the aircraft. The whole crash scene was downright bizarre. There were what appeared to be scratches all over the nose of the chopper, and one of its windows was completely broken. I could see the outline of the pilot's body by this point, but it just looked wrong. Now, during my career as a cop in such a forested area, up to that point I'd seen a couple instances of campers mauled by grizzly bears. The sight before me had been easily comparable. The dead pilot had likely been killed or knocked out by the initial impact of the chopper crashing, but he appeared to be grotesquely mutilated as well. This guy had limbs missing. Like, completely torn off. The flying uniform he'd been wearing was soaked in blood and lacerated all over. I didn't get a look at his face, thank God. But I still see that dead pilot in my worst nightmares. You might be wondering why I stopped looking at him by that point. Both Cooper and I knew, after just a second of staring at the poor guy, that something was horribly wrong. By that point, we didn't know what exactly to think of the situation, so Cooper simply began connecting the towing cables to the top of the chopper. I watched him perform this task that would seem completely tedious on a normal day. But I can still remember overwhelming fear quelling throughout my entire body. The metallic clank of hooks snapping onto the chopper echoed throughout the lake, drifting off into the deep blue haze created by the water. I was looking all around. Something was going to happen. I could instinctively tell as a police officer. But what I was afraid could happen was completely unknown. For just a second, I thought of a movie I'd seen in the theater a few years back. Jaws. I think I laughed nervously to myself at the morbid thought, before being jolted back to reality by Cooper's agonized screams. I whipped my head up and nearly vomited into my gear at the sight of a twisting, writhing mass of an animal surrounding Cooper. Before my very eyes was part of a serpentine body. That much was for sure. I couldn't see a head or fins or whatever it was, but Cooper was surrounded by a rapidly coiling mass of a black, scaled, snake-like body. In the moment, I marveled at the scale of such a monstrosity. Cooper looked like a trapped animal, desperate and struggling against the might of a jungle python. It still sickens me to recollect my following thought, partially because of how true it felt. This death is simply an act of nature, an apex predator in its element, and we're the prey for it to dominate. There's no exact moment when I can remember doing this, but I had darted at Cooper in a last-ditch attempt to save his life. The snake body was swirling around him like some kind of pitch-black vortex, and even in my state of panic, I knew my driver's knife wouldn't be enough to free my companion. Sure as hell didn't stop me from trying, though. I hacked and slashed at what felt like a pure lump of coiled muscle. Blood clouded the water around us, seeming to engulf my struggle to free Cooper. The snake body writhed in pain, and before I could even react, an unfathomable, eel-like head had lurched forward and tore away at my front. I felt its fangs rip through my wetsuit and lacerate my skin immediately, but somehow I managed to drive my previously useless knife into the roof of its mouth and mercilessly hack away at the soft flesh. My ears rung as the creature lurked back in pain and let out some kind of otherworldly echo, something that I never could have imagined hearing from anything under the sun. It must have been a matter of seconds after that, but in the clear water there was no mistake. Coiled around my fellow officer was what could only be described as a monstrous, eel-like abomination that looked as if it belonged in an H.P. Lovecraft story rather than the calm lake I'd gotten to know. Animalistic rage flashed from its slanted black eyes as its mouth seeped with blood and gradually diffused into the water. A few of its teeth even fell out and slowly sunk as if they were daggers descending into the depths of hell. In this moment, I faced off with pure, unadulterated horror before me, like I had no other confrontation in my life. The serpent holding my friend in a grip of death, and somehow Cooper was still alive. There was no longer any fear in my heart. I had to save him. The officer I had served alongside for nearly a decade of my life. We had saved lives together, and even busted a handful of criminals in the area. And now, he lay in a twisted knot, barely conscious, unable to breathe, nearly floating as his life slipped away. The assailant of the water stared at me, hate-filled eyes sunken into a horse-sized, serpentine head. I still can't decide if it was a lake demon or a marvel of nature. All of those thoughts ran through my head in a matter of seconds. I'd even wager that it was clever enough to think some similar things. In a flurry of motion, the serpent tightened its coil around Cooper, his arms flying out limply. At the same time, it lunged at me with reptilian ferocity as my entire thigh was pierced by needle-sharp daggers. bone crunching as well. I don't even remember having done it, but my right hand had lurched forward as I was bitten. Through my own shrieks of agony, I could feel my ears ringing in pain, much worse than before. I'd hit my target. I let go of my knife, watching with grim satisfaction as the handle protruded from the serpent's eye. Thick, red blood covered my right hand, and 7 inches of stainless steel stuck into the serpent's eye. The whole mass of the creature writhed and twitched uncontrollably, and for the first time, I noticed that its body only faded off into the distance of the water. I couldn't see any tail. Within seconds, it had let go of my friend and vanished into the deep blue of the lake. There was still blood all around us as I seized Cooper's limp body and shot up to the surface with him. I can just barely recollect Richard clutching a 12-gauge shotgun, screaming, just screaming at us. I was screaming too, but only for him to get help straight away for Cooper. I had lifted him up from the surface and into Richard's hands, where he was swiftly pulled on to the safety of the boat. Severe blood loss began to take its toll. Once I saw Cooper safe, I could only then feel my thigh, torn up, crushed, punctured all over. Later, they would pull a 7-inch tooth out of my leg. I sank back into the lake, just falling limp. I couldn't breathe, but as I opened my eyes underwater, I swear I could see a glimmer of black mass advancing my way from a great distance. The next thing I knew, I was lying in an ambulance. Richard had bravely dived in after me, but by that point I was in a heightened state of shock. I didn't remember being hoisted onto the boat, the medical teams and state police arriving, any of the stuff that actually got public attention. Might as well address this now. We only told the state police our story, not the media. There's no way we could remain credible with such a fantastic story. And most importantly, there's no way I could let that lead to the delegitimization of Cooper's death. Cooper was dead before I even got him to the surface. He'd gone into shock and drowned. Despite everything we went through together, Richard was the one who told me. I didn't believe it for days, until they finally let me see the body of my closest officer. My friend. Skin a pallid white, as if he were a ghost of the lake. Body torn up like a rag doll chewed by a dog. His eyes were still open, mouth just barely agape. Not in an expression of horror, but mellow shock. That was years ago. I've thought about Cooper every day since then, and now more than ever. As my life is coming to a close, I know the conclusion I must face. That which I have been unable to accept all of these years. There had been some other stories and sightings of a serpentine creature in Lake Crescent through times past, ranging from Native American legends to supposed photographs from the last few decades. No one's ever found anything, and they never will. Those pictures, they're all fakes, or mistaken identities at least. But there is truth to the legends surrounding Lake Crescent. That thing I encountered, its very being cannot be located so simply. You can't just go and take pictures of it either. It doesn't work that way. I know this. I've known it for years. What the serpent was remains a mystery to me, but I can promise with every bit of my soul that it is still there, waiting for me. And that when it so chooses its encounters with people, they just won't be able to escape. I haven't been to the lake or even up north since I retired. I'm leaving for Lake Crescent tonight. I've left a letter for my family, as well as my will. I'll return to those northern waters, the ones I've dreaded for so long. Those waters which have been the red tides of my nightmares for all too much of my life. I'll return to Lake Crescent and take a police boat out. I know how to get around there well enough. And for the last time, I will put on my wetsuit and go back into those deceptively clear waters. I'll explore a bit, even though the helicopter's long gone. But I do know the serpent will be waiting for me. Could such a beast even age? I doubt it. Those glistening black scales, the endless mass of a creature, it'll be there. And once again, we'll face off. The last ultimate confrontation of our lives. There you have it, explorers. The creature of Lake Crescent revealed. Does such a monster exist? Or was it hallucinated by a man full of grief after the loss of his friend? Who survived the final confrontation? Does this beast still lurk in those northern waters? That is for you to decide. Remember to join us next time as we venture deep into the fog. In the Fog was created by Lionel Jeffries and Paul Kelly Jr. Written by Lionel Jeffries. Narrated by Paul Kelly Jr. Produced by Paul Kelly Jr. Join us next time when we tell the tale of the woman in the fog.